Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of QSBS Solved. This is part 2 of our 5-episode series, our QSBS Masterclass. I'm joined once again by Scott Dolson, who's a partner at Frost Brown Todd. And we are picking up our conversation today talking about hopefully like an audio version of one of Scott's popular articles titled Finding Suitable Replacement Qualified Small Business Stock, Section 1045 Primer. So this episode is about QSBS rollovers and the various things that you might be able to do with cash from a quote unquote early QSBS exit if you're trying to take advantage of Section 1045 and QSBS rollover. So, Scott, thanks for joining again.
Yeah, no problem. We probably ought to just state what the basic rules are of 1045, for somebody who might not know. So, so I'm assuming everybody's familiar with 1202 at this point. Section 1045 is a separate statute. In a way, it functions hand in hand with 1202, but it's also separate. It's essentially a like-kind exchange in a certain sense of you sell qualified small business stock. Section 1045 says if you want to, it's not mandatory, but you can make an election to reinvest some or all of the proceeds from the sale of your original QSBS investment within 60 days after the sale date, the closing, into what I call replacement qualified small business stock investment. Now, there's one wrinkle, which is, most deals have deferred payments like escrows, indemnity payments, sometimes just, payments that extend out over 1 year. All of those are typically governed by Section 453, the installment sale rules, even the ones where people are buying stock and it's almost like a pharma licensing thing where, the additional payments are like 50 cents per widget sold or some amount per revenues of the drug that the company had or something like that. Those are still all typically governed by the installment sale rules. And the issue there is, well, let's say the worst example, which is, I don't get paid anything in year one. And you could have a deal where you get all your money in year three, nothing in year one, $10 million. So what happens to the question 45 is, do I have to reinvest $10 million within 60 days of closing in replacement stock? That doesn't sound right, does it? You could say literally the argument would be that 1045, this would be the IRS's argument, requires that. Now, is there an argument based on tax authorities that the 60 days ought to run off the date you get paid the installment payment? There is a return position, I believe, associated with that. I would rather tell somebody write the check. But of course, like I gave the extreme example, usually it's not that extreme. Usually it's like 10% or 15% or something's deferred. But that is an open issue out there, a gray area. But fortunately, there is a return position because, let's face it, as a practical matter, some people just are not in the position to write that check for the full amount on day one.
Yeah, and then the right down the fairway scenario where a QSBS rollover would maybe be an effective strategy is where you just have a cash sale at year 3 or 4. So you sell your business for $10 million and you as the founder make $8 million after the sale, and that $8 million gets wired to your bank account. But you look up and you say, well, I haven't held my stock for 5 years, so I guess I owe this big tax bill. You could take all or a portion of that $8 million, invest it in new qualified small business stock. And so I guess this is where we jump into what are the suitable replacement stocks and that you could invest in. We think of this in 3 different ways. Scott, you can tell me how you think of it. We think of this as you can make angel investments with that money. you could start your own new business with that money, or you could start basically your own new holding company or your own new business and go out and search for an acquisition with that money. And you could acquire a company that essentially is run QSBS eligibly. Those are the three main options, and we can talk about the pros and cons of those, and then maybe we can dig deeper into some of the subsequent options in each of those categories. Is that the three categories that you think of?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, if I'm sitting here and I've just got $8 million, I let's face it, not too many people either have this available to them or want to, walk down the street if you're in Palo Alto and knock on the door and say, "Hey, are you selling preferred stock?" I mean, or something like that, right? And what they'll say to you is, "Well, we'll sell you a safe note, or instrument," and then there'll be the issue of whether that's even stock under for 1045. So I mean, I do have some clients that are venture capitalists that have all of this lined up, and it's like they're like a they're like a musician timing and moving their money from one to the other. But that's pretty rare, right? You do,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, if you're making angel investments with that rollover capital, really only makes sense if you're already an angel or like institutional investor, and your idea of for this money from the outset was to keep sort of the velocity of that money moving, keep the risk high, stay with your thesis. Most of what we see is founders and employees of companies, and their idea of of tax planning is not let's keep the ball moving at the puck moving at full speed. It's, hey, let's slow things down and go into sort of conservation mode, or see how much money ultimately I can shield from tax. And so typically making angel investments for a founder who just got some of their first money in uh, probably isn't going to be a real strategic tax planning move for them. And so that's why we start thinking about things like starting your own new company. So at least in this scenario, you control the entity that the investment is going into. Uh, Conceivably, you can control when you liquidate that company, whether it's through some kind of sale or corporate liquidation. At least you control sort of your destiny. And we believe that founder control of that capital is probably the most downside protected way that you can achieve, a rollover.
yeah. I mean, I'd say for every 10 people that get a hold of us who are in the situation, who are fortunate enough to be selling, uh, and either have too much QSBS gain or they don't have the holding period, there's going to be one who has a spouse that has a business, or they're a family office and have another business. So there's going to be one of those. Maybe there's going to be one venture capitalist. There's going to be one, you know, somebody who's always wanted to do some new startup, knows they need the money, and this is really important. Isn't part of the management team of the buyer and restricted from doing it. So, that you probably get like 3 out of 10 there. And then the other 7 are in that category of people who they don't want to look that. So they've hit it big. They don't want to lose all their money. And they've never dealt with this issue before. They're investors or they're founders, and they don't have the background or sort of just the framework to try to figure out how to get to do the 1045 rollover. They want to do it. They've heard about it. They've read about it. They read these articles and all that, but it's getting from that point A to Z that is the hard part. And that's where you guys come in. And we have a lot of conversations about those issues with people.
Yeah, that's really the problem we set out to solve 2.5 years ago, which was, hey, what if there was an option for, especially for founders, that was at the complete other end of the sort of risk and liquidity curve than angel investments, right? So instead of putting your money into something that is 90% of the time going to burn your capital, like sort of John's startup in Palo Alto, and instead of something that might take 10 to 14 years to exit, what if there was something a little bit more flexible and controlled and liquid? And we went through a lot of these different ideas of what the best quote unquote rollover companies were for strategic planning. I mean, you talk about several of them in your article, but I'll tell you actually the one that we thought was just a home run until we realized that you can't do it early on. And I don't know if we've ever talked about this, Scott, but my partners and I conceived that the best thing you could do with your rollover dollars was to, it would be great if you could go and buy corn and keep it in a silo and then later sell it. And the asset that your company would own would be corn, and you'd be a merchant selling corn.
That
And
would be an investment, right? That would be the
exactly.
problem.
So yeah, until we realized that it's going to be treated basically as a commodity, which it is, which is functionally an investment or security for the
I mean,
people.
I mean, here at Louisville, Kentucky, I've had
Yeah.
people come to me about bourbon barrels. Now, talk
Well,
about investing in something. The problem is investing.
yeah.
Buy a barrel of bourbon, and then when people want to do one of these blended bourbon products, and they're starting a new distillery, they need some bourbon, so they buy these barrels. But it's hard to get away from being an investor in that
Well,
category.
what we thought was, hey, if you could buy an asset that was extremely liquid and that didn't go down drastically in value one week to the next, which commodities are good for that. I recognize that what we're talking about is you can't do commodities, but what you could do is buy a bunch of corn and turn it into whiskey. So you could uh,
Yeah,
manu- manufacture a product at that point and sell it. But I don't know. I just wanted to humor you a little bit with that was really
yeah.
that is the best option. Selling some kind of commodity, highly liquid, uh, low volatility commodity would be a great business for
Well,
QSBS.
that's my retailer. I mean, it's close to my retailer concept in the article. I mean, it is perfectly fine to be a retailer. I mean, if you want to go open a hardware store, you're a retailer, or if you're online and you're buying and selling Pokemon cards. I mean, my 9-year-old, when he was still doing those, I would say I always pronounce it wrong. So whatever the pronunciation is, buy and sell those cards, and there are people who are doing that, who are actually in that business. They're not just investing in those cards. The problem is
Yeah.
that you've then really got to be in the business, right? You can't just be investing in them. So you can hire people like you guys to do the work. If you are the person putting the 8 million bucks in the corporation, you can be a person who helps the business have active conduct. You're allowed to do that, but you actually don't have to do anything. You just are the investor in the company. You can hire people to do the work for you, but they've got to be actively conducting the business. They can't be investing. It can't be an investment in something. But we
Yeah.
could,
The big
yeah,
difference there, Scott, is like, I think of it as like commercial momentum.
yeah.
Like, I'm a wine and whiskey collector, and my wine and whiskey isn't listed on a Shopify e-commerce site anywhere, right? Like, no one can come on and buy it while I'm sleeping. And so my collection is a hobby, but if it's anything commercial, it's an investment, is what it
Right.
is. I guess it's just sitting there. But and there's actually we have our friend, we have a private letter rolling, the jewelry store guy, and you can correct me on some of the fine details, but sort of the gist of it was a guy had $1 million, and he said, "Well, I'm going to start a jewelry business," and he went out and bought, what was it, like $50,000 worth of
Yeah, it's
jewelry.
like 3 million bucks. It was a tax score case. He bought a couple, maybe 100 grand or a couple 100 grand of vintage jewelry, but he didn't really do anything. He just stuck it
Stuck it
in
in
the
the drawer.
drawer,
Yeah.
and he told the tax court judge, well, the reason I didn't invest the rest of the money in there and didn't spend a bunch of money was I needed to learn the business first. And the tax court judge said, this is not credible.
Yeah.
You lose.
Yeah, and that's fine if you, every company goes through call it like a startup or research and development stage where they're trying to understand how their product or service fits into a market. You can't just think thoughts in your head and try and claim that you were doing real sort of educate, trying to educate yourself on the market. It'd be helpful to have some a paper trail of that education happening at least to make that story a little bit more credible, I think.
Well, you can certainly do it if you're not trying to get 1045 and 1202, but if you're trying to get the benefits of those code provisions, you better have extremely well documented effort, both uh, boots on the ground effort and some expenditures that supports the conclusion that your business was being actively conducted. Because otherwise, if it turns into the next Google, great, then we're not going to be worrying about that, right? But if it doesn't, if it fails, and 90% of businesses fail, and it's one of those, and you're out there 6 years out, and you say, like 90% do, my business has failed, I'm going to liquidate, and I'm going to claim 1202. You better have, and this will be another session, we'll talk about this, you better have like the best documented effort showing what you did in terms of the paperwork and everything, so you can credibly win that case, because the IRS is going to have an expert. Number one, they're going to grill you and your expert, but they're going to have an expert, and that expert's going to testify these guys didn't do any of the stuff that a normal, reasonable person would have done in their place. So you've got to be able to be prepared to counter that by showing, in fact, that what was done was what a reasonable person would do, backed by that amount of money, and with the mission to achieve this end result. That's kind of the name of the game that the work, kind of the universe we're operating in here.
Yeah, a example I give of this to try and demonstrate like what is real and what is reasonable is what I call the lemonade stand example. And this is kind of, if you roll over $5,000 into a company and you say, well, the business I'm starting is a lemonade stand, and you go to the store and buy some paper plates and cups and country time, and that makes sense. I can see how you could use $5,000 to capitalize that business. But if you try and say the same with $5 million in a business, well, you better have plans to bottle that lemonade and take it into some retail shops and do other things. And so there's definitely a scale and spectrum of like, how much money are you rolling over, and what type of business aspirations do you have there, and what is your plan to actually commercialize that business? All of those are crucial factors for justifying
Yeah.
your
I
rollover.
mean, my opinion is that whether you have 5,000 or $5 million, what you need to be able to, in a compelling fashion, prove that on day one, I had a plan where I needed all that money.
Sure.
Now, we all know, once day one hits, it's like a football game, right? Everybody's got their plan, but the first time you get hit on the first play, everything changes and all that. It's the same way with a company. So things do change, but you need to show that if I had 5 million bucks in there, I needed that 5 million. It may mean I don't need it until I hit certain benchmarks to hit the commercialization stage. But you've got to be able to show that, because I think if you don't show that, if you can only prove, let's say you needed $1.5 million, I don't know why the tax court judge wouldn't say, well, that other 3.5 is not a good 1045 rollover. That doesn't mean at the end of the day you needed it, because maybe the thing didn't work out. That prototype never worked, right?
Yep.
Like so I preach, you can tell I preach this all the time, what I do, and I know you guys deal with this too. It's critical for being successful if we ever had to sort of face up to the IRS on these issues.
Yeah, and this is like for me has always been a little bit gray in the sense that I see companies all the time who are still at a stage of growth where they're still issuing eligible stock. So they're not, they don't have $200 million worth of assets, but they're raising, say, a Series A, 4 months after they raised a seed round, and the reason they raised the money is because they could. And yeah, maybe they can like tell you we're going to use it on hiring or some other thing. But I personally, just in our work with clients, know of many companies who haven't touched a dollar of their venture funding, and they only raise because the money is available to raise, and they know that they'll
Well,
need it eventually, but There is a gray area here, I believe, or am I like, trying to color it where there's a
Well, those companies are going to take your money. I mean, it's completely out of your control. And your exit is going to be either the company goes belly up or you're going to sell your stock and you're either going to make money or you're going to be paid pennies on the dollar for your stock. They're never going to liquidate the company and give you back any of your money. So I think it kind of naturally plays out with those kinds of investments where the difficult situation I think is with 1045 is I put the $5 million in the company, I operated for 18 months. And I mean, I truly tried everything I possibly could. Maybe I spent 300 grand because all I was doing was R&D and stuff like that. But the thing just did not work. I mean, at that point, let's say I've hit the 5 years and I liquidate, I mean, there's no reason under the terms of 1045 and 1202 that you shouldn't be able to claim the gain exclusion. The issue for me is, can I substantiate that I actively conducted this business? So it's kind of a unique situation versus, me dumping money. Somebody raises money and I give them $1 million when they don't really need it. I'll never get that million back. I mean, I'm either going to sell the stock down the road or I'm going to lose the $1 million on the stock. So the one I focus on, I don't have to focus on the one that's successful, right? That takes care of itself. I got to focus on, lawyers. This is lawyers. I have to focus on the one where the scenario where we do liquidate and get the money back. In that case, then I just need to make sure we've done everything we can to uh, let people know what the rules are about active conduct, and then try to help clients any way we can achieve the active conduct. And I mean, they've got to do what they've got to do to make it successful from a business standpoint with whatever help they want to acquire. That's not my job, but my job is to make sure they understand that what it would take to win a tax court trial if we ever were in that situation.
Yeah, it's when folks come to us and they're assessing their options with rollovers. The chief concern that we often hear is like, how do I make sure that my capital is relatively protected if maybe I don't know exactly what this business will be, right?
Yeah.
And so the rollovers do provide the opportunity to wander in the woods a little bit. I believe, it's like, hey, let's take this money to seed a new company. I have an idea, but I don't know fully and completely what this idea will turn into or if it will turn into anything. But I like the opportunity that rollovers provide to founders who fundamentally we believe are the best capital allocators. Like I want entrepreneurial people working on ideas, wandering in the woods, as it were, on new concepts. And so, just philosophically, I like what rollovers can achieve for folks in terms of giving them the opportunity to do that in a tax advantaged way. That's a philosophical thing for us.
Yeah. I mean, the question for me in life would be, given whatever they did, would we be able to hire an expert and the expert would say, this is not that unusual what these people did.
Sure.
They were trying to figure out, they had an idea that they wanted to do something in this category and they had to formulate it. I mean, that's startup, right? And R&D. Or they wanted to go buy some molecule from some university that had it sitting on the shelf and it turned it into $1 billion company. But they had to find that. And it took a while to find out that University of Akron had what they wanted to buy, let's say, or they wanted to buy a company in the plumbing supply industry, and it took a while to find it, and that's what they were doing. So we just have to be able to say, we formed a company, and what we were doing is what we would have done if we had, if Brady Weller had invested the $5 million in there, that your high school buddy or college roommate said, give me $5 million, you're rich, Brady. You write a check into the C Corp. Now, what is that guy supposed to be doing? And was what was done what was supposed to be done? That's where I think you're credible if you can show that, whatever it is, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I like the framing of if you brought in someone who was already in the industry that your new business is in, would they say the things that you're doing are reasonable and legitimate activities? You know, if you're starting a software business and you use proceeds from the company to, I don't know, this may run into other issues, but buy an Airbnb and you piddle around with that, like I don't know if you're a software company, for instance, but might
Right.
come up, it might have some other issues with that. Which, speaking of Airbnbs, people ask us a lot, can I roll over into real estate or can I buy a laundromat? Can I do some of these other things? In the last like 5 or so minutes we have here, what are some structures you've seen that have allowed people to either hold directly or indirectly fairly substantial amounts of real estate and still maintain QSBS? Or is that just, you know, one of those areas where you don't see a lot of opportunity?
Well, you're likely to get challenged, but technically under 1202, real estate itself is an excluded category, but real estate that is used in a non-excluded activity is okay. So, Amazon can own all the warehouses it wants to. A golf course, stuff like golf courses or ski resorts, theoretically you could have real estate owned. You could buy and renovate a building and put a grocery store in it. There are things that you can do. Now, if
So,
you
hold on, Scott. The difference there is it like the passive versus active use, or is what they're trying to avoid?
it's used in the active conduct of something, selling groceries is okay. You're a
Okay, yeah,
retailer of groceries. So, you could either lease your land or you could buy your land.
yeah.
So you
It's
could buy
okay to have roll over $10 million and buy a $4 million piece of a $4 million building. So you have 40% of your assets of the business are real estate, as long as you're using that bill. That's okay.
Yeah, I mean, but there's going to be some line, and I don't know where the line is, the smell test line. Like you
Okay.
have $4 million rolled over and you spend, 8.5 on a building and you put in a
Art
business that,
gallery.
yeah, you know what I'm saying. Look, people, I don't know about you, but people reach out to us all the time with these very creative ideas like that. And we'll find out where the line is, right?
Eventually.
The tax court looks at some of these things. But I mean, technically, you can have real estate that is owned as part of the business, but don't let the tail wag the dog, even though you may want to, but there's a risk to that.
Well,
But
yeah, we typically tell people not more than we guide by the 80/20 rule there and say, well, if you want to roll over $10 million and buy, say, $1.5 million of real estate, and so you've got 15% of your assets in something that's technically non-qualifying. However, maybe it's used or not used, whatever. Call it non-qualifying. We usually guide to that, but it sounds like maybe you're being a little bit more expansive than I've typically been.
well, I
So
mean, I'm dealing with people who they're coming with the sort of the more extreme examples. I mean, my guidance would probably be you're better off not buying any real estate. Do what everybody else does, which is buy the real estate in a separate entity and lease it to the operating company. But people are doing that. They're doing it for tax reasons sometimes, but they're doing it not for 1202 planning. But like I said, I mean, there is some flexibility there, but you also have to watch out for not being in sort of in the hotel, motel, restaurant, and the like category. There's several lines of things that are excluded. And some of these activities are kind of in that category, like, storage facilities and things like that, I think might fall into the potentially an excluded category, but it wouldn't be because of the real estate. It would be, well, it'd be sort of a combination of that and leasing, that kind of limitation. There's some separate limitations. Uh, but every situation is a one-off thing to look at. But yeah, I mean, just pure real estate plays are definitely excluded, even though we'd love to be able to do them.
yeah, I mean, I guess the like way overarching concept that I tell people on real estate is they don't want you to use this tax advantage structure or this QSBS benefit to house your real estate portfolio in whatever that might look like. And so, yeah, if you say that you're a grocery store, but your grocery store isn't a super good business, but the building happens to be worth $9 million. What don't they call McDonald's a real estate company now? Because they have so many locations, and their real estate portfolio grows more than their revenue from their business.
Yeah, I mean, for some businesses, unfortunately, it turns out that their only good asset is their real estate, right?
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
I think those are really interesting conversations to me. And you're right, we don't know everything that the IRS intends with some of those, but at the end of the day, it's about bringing on the right folks who are paying attention to the facts and circumstances and helping you document all of that. And so, well, that's what Scott and I do. So it's a good team to have in your corner. Anything else you want to say on 1045? Our next two parts will be about substantiating QSBS, which we'll get to talk probably about a lot more of that over these two next
No, I
episodes.
think we're good on this one. It definitely is an area where substantiation is critical. I mean, one thing that's an interesting you like philosophical issues. Why do we have? I mean, I'm not saying we don't have this, but why do we have any of this on the replacement stock? Because didn't we already make the original investment? And so didn't Congress achieve what we originally wanted? And now all we're doing is we're sort of getting this extra little benefit that caused us to make the original investment. It's almost a travesty that we have to twice meet these requirements. Because we met it, we just sold early. So
Yeah.
what? We made the investment, right? But but we have to deal with it. We have to deal with, the law as it is. But if it were me, I would be going a different path on that.
I see the government quote unquote incentives as, yeah, we want to boost the startup early stage ecosystem, but we also want C corp taxes. So
Well, I mean, they,
I don't know.
their mission, and the Supreme Court, unfortunately, said this is where you have a gain exclusion. Their job is to interpret it and apply it as narrowly as they can. So the message there is you better be ready to prove your case, because their job is to try to take away from you what Congress gave you.
Yeah, I mean, people ask, well, why is QSBS so generous? It's like, how much money some of these, for instance, tech businesses spit off in cash each year. It's not like, the tax, even at 21%, the tax bill is a good thing for if you're talking from the government's point of view, from the IRS's point of view. So, there's a benefit running both ways here. More
Sure.
companies being taxed as a C corp. So. Cool, Scott. Yep. Let's move over to part three. If you're listening to this episode, stay tuned for part three. We'll talk about substantiating QSBS.